This is TransportBT, a podcast of BT correspondents.
Welcome to TransportBT, a podcast of BT correspondents. I'm your host, Derryn Wong. Now, every week, my colleagues and I break down a business story that matters. Today, we're going to take a look at a topic that everyone hates but can't stop talking about. Yes, it's the T word. No, not terror, not tabernacle, not tentacle, but far, far worse, tariffs. As we record this, now the Trump administration has paused its very well-designed tariff plan, and there is still a blanket 10% tariffs on all goods coming into the USA, aside from, of course, the essential start of a trade war with China. So there's a lot of doom and gloom out there. We thought we'd take a more balanced look and try and see the silver linings of the whole situation. And they are there, especially for Asia Pacific and maybe even for Singapore as well. Now, to talk us through the eye of this storm, I've got somebody who knows all about getting things from A to B. Javier Bilbao, CEO Asia Pacific at DHL Supply Chain. So welcome to the show, Javier.
Nice to be here.
Give us a bit of background about yourself.
Well, I've been in the logistics industry for quite some time, 25 years. At the time, I could say that I bumped into logistics almost by coincidence. But as the years have evolved, logistics has become a lot more prevalent, hence the importance of us talking here today.
You know, your role specifically says DHL Supply Chain. But of course, people know DHL as, a courier service primarily, but that's not their only business, right? You got stuff like global freight and forwarding and e-commerce. What are the differences between these segments?
So as you say, DHL covers a lot of things. And we are present almost everywhere in the world. We like to say internally, an essential part of everyday life. Express is the most widely known, is the one that's sending envelopes and small packages. If you are not so time sensitive, you have the DHL e-commerce alternative. Then on a bigger scale, the DGF, DHL Global Forwarding, will move containers by air or by ocean. And finally, DHL Supply Chain, it's typically more focused on warehousing and distribution. And there is a lot of connections between how we execute our work and how ready or not our customers may be to respond to the situation around tariffs.
So it's more of if I'm running, say, a factory and I want to get sugarcane to my factory every week or something, I get you guys to help me with that.
That could be a very good example. We do a lot of inbound to manufacturing, but we also distribute for a lot of retailers to their stores. So we will manage the warehouse that picks and packs and delivers to the stores. We also design the flows across international supply chains. For example, for the semiconductors, we often participate in that inflow into the factory. But we then take the products from the factory store, prepare the products for either international shipment or for distribution within the country in which we operate.
It sounds quite complex and quite in-depth, actually. So it's not just A to B, but
there's a lot of engineering.
So let's get back to the past few weeks. We had a very unpleasant ride. So Singapore's Prime Minister Derryn Wong said on April 8th, Trump's measures will accelerate the fracturing of the global economy. It's pretty strong language. It sounds bad, of course, but help me understand how do tariffs affect prices globally? So common example is an iPhone. And I think one report said that the price of an iPhone might go up to more than $2,000, for example.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work actually?
Yes, there is a lot of components that affect the final pricing of products that need global trade to participate in it. If you take an iPhone for an example, the semiconductors may have been produced in Taiwan, cameras may be coming from Japan, rare earths that are necessary for the production maybe from China, and then they get assembled in a particular country. Then you have to start thinking about country of origin. With all so many components, what is the actual country of origin of the final product that is being shipped? Because that is a big element in dictating what are the tariffs that will be applied. And then which are the countries that are involved in that movement? If it's a bilateral move between China and the US, it has an impact that is very different from if you're sending those same iPhones to Europe. The tariffs involved are different. And the fact that you put a 10%, whatever number it is, in one step of the chain, then has other ripple effects that may end up with that 10% becoming 15% or 18%. So it's highly uncertain exactly how each of these elements will impact, because on the one side, we don't know exactly how the tariffs will evolve.
Exactly.
Also, there's so many other components and so the movements companies will do that very uncertain.
We don't know how bad it could get because it has a compounding effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so earlier this year, DHL published a really interesting report, the Trade Atlas, and that gives a comprehensive analysis of trade patterns for more than 200 countries where you guys operate and all. There was actually a whole entire section in the report about how trade can trump, so to speak. Could you elaborate on that for our listeners?
I think the key element there is trade has been extremely resilient over the years. And there is a number of facts in that report that help us understand the why. To start with, more than 20% of the goods sold in the world today have been involved in international trade. So you can't remove 20% of goods. You still need for that to happen. Second element that I think is very important to bear in mind is that the US represents 9% of the total exports and 13% of the total imports. If you actually think of how things have evolved over the years, how the world has reacted to situations in the past that have prompted a perception that trade could be under threat. The other day, in one of our internal discussions about the impact of tariffs, this was based on the main page of The Economist in three distinct moments. One was in the global financial crisis in 2008. The main headline was The Gated Globe, Brexit and Trump, and it's called In Retreat. And then when COVID-19 came, the headline was Goodbye Globalization. And we can see how we've been able to find ways to recover. And I'm paraphrasing some of my colleagues. Trade is like water. You can try to block it from one side, but then it will find its way somewhere else.
That's a good analogy, actually, yeah. Because people want goods from other places and people require that for their economies. It's just a fact of life now, right?
Mm-hmm.
That trade is resilient. But how exactly do companies that you know about, how do they actually adapt? What steps do they take to adapt to barriers?
So every case is different, but maybe to use an example, when the war in Ukraine started, the automotive industry realized that a lot of the cabling units that go into cars were all manufactured, were all sourced from Ukraine. There was that single point of failure that they hadn't considered before, because nobody had foreseen that a war in Ukraine would happen at the scale that it happened. And it prompted an immediate need to find alternative suppliers in other parts of the world, prompted also a review of all their supply chains and identifying products that were also mono-sourced in one particular location and start looking at ways to break that.
So basically what you're saying is it's not goodbye globalization, and it's actually not that hard to destroy the supply chains right now? Or
what I think we're going to be seeing is, of course, disruption because there's uncertainty. Business tends to be extremely conservative to sudden changes, to uncertainty more than anything. So when you don't know where things are going, immediate reaction is, let's take a pause. Let's take some time to evaluate the situation, particularly when you're talking about big investments. So I think probably the biggest short-term impact is big investment decisions in new factories, etc. will take a pause. And that will not be noticed today. That will have an impact 2-3 years from now. But short-term, it's extremely difficult for any big changes to happen. All of those components that make up the part of the iPhone that we were talking about earlier, you can't immediately source from somewhere else. It's not like there's spare capacity waiting for people to decide, no, I'm going to buy from you or from these others. There is agreements with companies on volumes. There is limitations on where the products are. There's warehousing capacity limitations. An immediate reaction that we're seeing also is because country of origin is the main driver of the tariffs that will be applied. Companies deciding to relocate parts so that in the aggregate composition of their products, they can avoid the taxes being applied to China or some other bigger penalized countries.
So they're trying to get the least worst of tariffs.
Let's just also bear in mind, this is the first time in many years that tariffs are the ones forcing a decision where you source from. For many years, it's been a stable situation. Suddenly, you're adding an extra dimension to how you calculate your total cost. Plus, there's the whole impact on how will trade with the US fare going forward. What will be the impact on organizations redirecting their focus towards less sales into the US and more sales into other countries? And therefore, the future dependency on tariffs will likely reduce.
So that's what they mean by uncertainty, capital U. Okay, so we're going for a halfway break. We're going to be back and we'll also talk about how Singapore might fare and how DHL aims to double its revenue. by 2030.
Money Hacks by the Business Times delivers useful financial tips every Monday. Subscribe to the playlists in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. But if watching is your thing, we've got you covered. Subscribe to the Money Hacks playlist in the podcast tab of BT's YouTube channel and watch as Howie Lim gets the inside scoop on the best money hacks. Subscribe and watch today.
And now, back to TransportBT, a podcast of BT correspondents.
Okay, we're back from our intermission and we have Javier Bilbao, CEO of Asia Pacific at DHL Supply Chain. And he's talking to us about the T word, tariffs. So we were talking about shifting trade, why the USA isn't as big as you might think. But I want to talk a bit about Singapore because Singapore is such a huge open economy, very trade-based. Last year we did 40 million 20-foot equivalent units, that's containers, of maritime cargo alone. And Singapore is also the biggest transshipment port in the world. So there's a big fear Singapore could be a big loser when global trade slows down because of the US tariffs. But you don't think so, right? Why not?
I think actually Singapore could be actually one of the big winners.
Big winners?
Because one of the things that Singapore provides to economic world is stability. You can predict what's going to happen. You know that it will not be subject to these trade wars because it's not necessarily aligned with a particular bloc. We are actually starting to see signs of our customers seeing Singapore as a safe space.
Already.
I wouldn't be surprised that in the midst of all of this, one of the few winners being Singapore.
You said there were some signs. Can you give us any detail on that?
We're having conversations with customers that want to move stock from other countries into Singapore and have more of that certainty, but also that ability to, in a port that is so easily connecting with so many parts of the world, take a decision on where you want to direct your flows.
And I actually read somewhere that some countries might try to build up more trade links with other countries and their regions as well. If they can't go to the US, maybe they try to come to the region instead. Is that right?
That is very likely to happen. When companies are not certain on the trade that they can have with that particular country, they will look for others. There will be products that are necessary for manufacturing in the US, and they will continue to go to the US irrespective of the tariffs because they have no alternative. There's many others that are consumption-based that, US citizens will say, why am I going to buy the Christmas decoration from China if it comes at a surplus of X? If all of that was going to the US before, now the US is not buying it. They're going to send it to other countries, probably at a lower price.
E-commerce bargains coming out, right?
I think it's likely to happen.
Now that we're talking about the region, and in the trade atlas, 4 Asian countries are actually forecast to rank among the top 30 for both speed in growth and the scale of growth as well. And that's India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So you guys obviously see a lot of growth still going ahead with those countries.
Yes, that was before all of this turmoil, anticipating that there could be an impact on Trump. But the fundamentals remain. India has been for a number of years, the recipient of a lot of foreign direct investment and investment in manufacturing. And with the scale that India has, with the fact that India is also one of those countries that is not directly aligned with any of the blocs, on its own, it's a country that will continue to grow. But I think there will be a more focus on, if we can't have the big factory space of China, India will benefit from that. Similarly, Vietnam has been a recipient on the technology developments. The question mark will be the links between China and Vietnam and how that is perceived in the global trade. Indonesia has a very large pool of minerals and rare earths that are fundamental for the economy in which we are today. So I think irrespective of what happens, they will also see an opportunity for growth. And the Philippines hasn't benefited so much lately, but it's also emerging as a good country for technology and manufacturing.
DHL has set a very ambitious target, Strategy 2030, and you guys want to grow your revenue by 50% from 2023 to 2030.
Mm-hmm.
And by my own count, that's like 80 million euros, and then you're going to go up by another 50%. That's a lot of dough. That is obviously linked to growth in Asia as well, right?
We've been in the recent years making significant investments in the region. We've announced in the past 500 million of investment in India, 350 million investment in the Southeast Asia region. And only this Monday, we announced one of the first investments with the 10 million in Singapore of a new hub. I'm not just telling DHL is doing all these good things. What I'm trying to demonstrate is we are going to need that capacity to respond to the movements of our customers, to not only execute the changes, but help our customers plan and understand the impact of the different moves. Having done that before all this happened just makes us into a better position of supporting these changes coming.
Because you guys would have planned all this way ahead before you heard of all this nonsense. It seems like some of the companies are stuck between a rock and a hard place. And naturally, DHL's business has been to help them solve these problems. But what can they do now? And what advice would you give your clients, or what solutions could you provide?
Definitely, to me, the key thing is engagement. You can't solve these problems on your own. You need to use your partners. We've been working with different supply chains. We've been designing flows for so many years that if we work together with our customers, we can give them alternatives. We can give them more options than they think. We are working, for example, on the concept of digital twins that help simulate to our customers what would be the impact. What will be the impact on tariffs, but what will be the impact on transport costs? What will be the impact on my contracts with my producers today? How long is it going to take for that change to be effective? And you start measuring, okay, these are all the impacts. The situation anyways, it's extremely complex to predict where this is going to go.
It's worse than the weather, right?
The best alternative that you can have is when you talk about the weather, you bring an umbrella with you, you bring the warm clothes, you bring extra layers, and you decide how you do it, right? It's the same here.
That is resilience, so to speak.
Resilience in the end is being able to have the tools to adjust to the changes that are coming. We used to associate it with natural disasters. But now we have all the geopolitical risks and wars and all that. We had the evolution of technology, which on its own would be a big change to be looking at. And then we have all these tariffs. So the one thing that is certain is we never get bored.
In logistics. And people say logistics is boring, but it's actually the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great way of putting it. Thank you, Javier, for a really good perspective on how everything's actually not that bad, and the headlines of The Economist have proclaimed far worse things in the recent past. So that was Javier Bilbao, who's the regional CEO for DHL's Supply Chain.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we've come to the end of this episode of TransportBT. Next week, BT correspondents will be back with an all-new episode on Singapore property. So please check it out. And if you have any thoughts or questions on the show, please drop us an email at btpodcasts@sph.com.sg. I'm correspondent Derryn Wong. As always, thank you for listening. See you next week.
This is a podcast by the Business Times. Find more BT podcasts at businesstimes.com.sg/podcasts. Or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is meant to provide general information only. SPH Media accepts no liability for loss arising from any reliance on the podcast or use of third parties' products and services. Please consult professional advisors for independent advice.